Hi folks, Lou here, and I'm going to talk about borrowing in relation to games. Now I find myself 26th on a waiting list for an electronic copy of the ninth and last book of the Expanse science fiction series, a very well-known series that I've read over the years. There's also Audible versions, which has a waiting list, but there are no paper copies, oddly enough. Perhaps they haven't been processed yet. But as I did this, I thought about all the people who are going to read the book and not buy it. But this is something that's gone on for a very long time in libraries, so it's generally accepted. In the case of tabletop games, I thought of all the people who played Britannia and my other games and did not buy it. Well, the difference here is the library copies of books, Expanse or otherwise, encourage people to read the book and then if they really like it, buy it. And of course, that's true of people playing Britannia and then deciding they want to buy it. The difference is the library has to buy those electronic copies and they're not cheap. So the authors get some money from the libraries, perhaps more, perhaps less than they would have by selling. I don't know. Especially for books that are not very well known, the library provides exposure to the author and to the book so that people have an opportunity to buy it. Now, in video games, years back, video games had a physical aspect, whether it was a cassette or a cartridge or a CD or a DVD. And so there was some borrowing of video games back then. Nowadays, of course, many of these games are digital only, and it's no longer possible to borrow them. The GameStop chain made a lot of money off of used games. People would buy a game, go and play it, however many times they wanted to play it, which often was only once, bring it back to GameStop, get paid a lot less than it was worth, and then GameStop would sell the used game for a lot more than a new game. And of course, many people who bought the used game never bought the new game. And at that time, there were some bigwigs in the industry who complained that they should get a cut of the used game fee. Well, that never happened, but they certainly made a lot of noise about it. And nowadays, I notice there's a kind of a gray market in Steam keys, Steam being the principal method of distribution of video games for PCs. Now, there is a tradition of passing around books and games so that other people can play them. You know, you give them to your friend and so on. Well, you can't do that with digital distribution, of course. And so that's true for video games. And it's true for electronic books. And of course, in the game markets, there's a lot of secondary sales. In other words, somebody buys a game, plays it however many times they're going to play it, which is often 1 to 3 times, and then decides, well, they're not going to play it again, and they sell it to somebody else, and those persons play the game, and again, the original publisher and author never make any money off of that. Now, is that right? Is that fair? I don't presume to judge. I can see both sides of the argument where people think that as it's distributed through the variety of ways, they ought to get some cut of it if they're the ones who created it. On the other hand, we can go to another extreme where there are some publishers who want books and other similar items to be rent only. Now, we tried this in software, and sometimes it has succeeded, sometimes not. Of course, in mainframe computer software, that's generally the only way you get software is to rent it. And so every year you're paying for it. And Microsoft 365 is an example of that in the PC world. Now, are we ever going to get to that point with games? I'm sure some people think that's an ideal because, of course, they can make more money that way. But whether it'll happen, who knows? I don't pretend to be a futurist. Well, thanks for listening.